person we're going to hear from is Luke Stuber. Luke Stuber is a product manager in R&D, and here's a photo of him running their sprayer on their family farm this spring with actually one of the products that he's responsible for from a product management perspective. So Luke farms locally with Stuber Fehr Farms in the Tremont, Illinois area. And Luke's been farming a long time. So I looked back, and you can see him right there in the red, and that's his family. And you know, I was lucky enough 30 years ago to be the neighbor kid that they got let tag along on their farm. So Luke and I go way back, so it's a pleasure to welcome him to the stage so he can share with you what they've learned on their farm in 2024. Luke, welcome to the stage.
Yeah, thanks, Bryce. Yeah, it's been a wild ride. Bryce and I grew up walking beans, baling hay together, and now I've had the privilege here to work together for the last 12 years. And so like Bryce said, I am Luke Stuber, one of the R&D guys here at Precision Planting, and then farm here locally. And so really this morning, what I want to do is take a little bit of a different approach and not so much talk about new products specifically or how they work, but more talk about what we have done on our own farm the last couple of years. Because I have a unique spot where I am leading teams developing these products as well as using them. And so we're able to kind of get some of those products on our farm, you know, early on and start using them. And so I want to talk through what we've seen, what we've experienced, and hopefully get you guys thinking of how some of this stuff could be used on your own farm. Really, in the essence of time this morning, I'm going to focus in on two areas. The first would be the sprayer. And the second one is really this idea of using your data. You've gathered data for a long time. You've probably run a yield monitor for years. You've got your planting maps. But the question is, are you actually doing anything with that? And I want to just talk through one practical example of how we are using the data on our farm to drive some decisions. But let's start with the sprayer first. You know, I don't have to go back that long ago, and we were using a rate controller with manual section valves. And then a number of years ago, we made the big jump, and we went to a rate controller, and now we have automatic section valves. I mean, that was a big win. Really reduced the fatigue on the operator. We reduced our total overlap, and we really thought we had something. And then 4 years ago, I was actually leading the team here at Precision that was developing our SymphonyNozzle product, which is a PWM sprayer control system. And so I was able to use my own sprayer at home as one of the alpha test machines. And so now for the last 4 years, I've been spraying with PWM, and I want to walk through kind of a few of the things we've seen with that. And then last year, we had the opportunity to install a SymphonyVision system. So now with SymphonyVision, I have the ability to actually spot spray my weeds. And I know this is gaining a lot of buzz in the industry. There's a lot of questions. Does it actually work? And so I want to talk through my experience, how we used it, what we saw in the field, and kind of what we're thinking about as we move forward. So let's start with PWM. I would say when I first got interested in a PWM system for my sprayer, the primary thing I was interested in was the fact that I could set my pressure and my rate independent of each other. And the main reason for that is it just makes it easier to do a good job spraying. I no longer need to drive a specific speed to maintain whatever pressure I was targeting. You know, I could drive to conditions, I could lower my pressure going around the outside edge of the field, I could raise it on the inside. It just gave me a lot of control. I think what I underestimated, though, was just the value of individual nozzle swath control. You know, we have the opportunity or privilege to farm what I'm going to call is a fair amount of rougher ground for Central Illinois. I know there's a lot of guys that say, hey, this farm doesn't look that bad, but for right in this area, you know, this would be a little bit rougher than a fair amount. You know, we've got an open ditch that goes to that farm. We've got a big waterway. There's a hillside that we've got terraced, so we've got contours. We farm it in 4 different patches. You know, when we ran a section-controlled sprayer, I would have planned on about 4 to 5% overlap in this field. So it's a 74-acre field, so I would have figured on, you know, overspraying by 3 to 4 acres. But now, with my individual nozzles, I basically match my planted acres. So my sprayed acres, planted acres essentially match. My overlap goes to 0, and so we're seeing a direct chemical savings, you know, through using individual nozzle swath. The other thing is just logistics-wise, it's been pretty nice. I actually know how much to plan for. And so one thing that you can do to just try to understand what you're looking like on your own farm is you can look at your planted acres, you can look at your sprayed acres, just figure out what your overlap is. It's probably higher than you think. If you're blessed to spray all square 160s, this doesn't matter. This wouldn't matter for you at all. But you have the data. Go look at it and see what the benefit is for yourself. The other thing that I really hadn't thought through until I experienced it was just the value of time. In this particular field, I've got 4 big waterways. By the time I would have pulled in, outlined all 4 of those waterways, I would have driven 2.25 miles. I'm spraying with a 90-foot wide sprayer. That works out to 24 acres I would have sprayed. This is an 84-acre field. So I would have sprayed 29% of the field just outlining my waterways. But now that I have individual nozzle swath, I can handle those waterways in a different way. I can either spray right through them, or I can outline them more efficiently. And so I can reduce my total time spent in the field. Because think about it, once I outline my waterways, I actually functionally cover those 24 acres again, as I'm going back and forth. So I spray, 24 acres twice. And so handling those waterways in a different way, I can now reduce my total time spent in the field. And I'm doing it in 2 ways. The first is, and this is really what I should say, this is dependent on the waterway. If you have a deep waterway that your booms are swaying as you come into, this technique works well. You've got an internal boundary, drop into the waterway, drive down the waterway, spray both sides at once. So I can cut my total outlining time in half. And the other way that we're doing it is, if you have a nice gentle waterway, just spray right through it. In this particular field, we did both. The one waterway is deep, it's hard to pull in and out of. The other ones are relatively gentle. And so we did both of those techniques. But it adds up to some pretty significant time savings in the field. I'm getting a number of questions from guys to, is it accurate enough? I don't want to burn the edges of my waterways. What I would say, my observation would be, is that the GPS controls, this is assuming you've got it set up correctly, are just as accurate as I am as the operator. I would love to tell you when I'm outlining a waterway that my boom tip is right down the edge all the time. The reality is it's not. Sometimes I'm into it 6 inches, sometimes I'm 6 inches away from it. And so overall, this system is accurate, and you're fully capable of doing it. And so this is how we've been handling our waterways the last couple of years, and it's been a big win from a time savings. And so if I look at our farm as a whole, I would say from a chemical saving standpoint, we're right at 3%. Some farms, we don't save anything. Some farms, we're saving 5 or 6%. But as a whole, we're talking about 3%. And so if you think about your chemical program, let's say it's $50 to $100, you're talking $1.50 to $3 an acre of savings. Because you're saving that savings on every pass you're making in the field. On the waterway standpoint, once again, this is very field dependent, 20 to 30% as far as time spent in the field with the sprayer, and this is farms that have waterways. If you don't have the waterways, you wouldn't have that savings. But overall, there's been a pretty big return from a, call it true dollar standpoint of running a PWM system. It's not just a convenience tool. The convenience is nice, but I would say for the average kind of Midwest grower, depending on the number of acres you spray, it's probably a 3 or 4 year payback, direct payback on a PWM system. And so once again, look at your fields. You can figure out how many miles of waterways you got. It's pretty easy to do. You can figure out your planted versus sprayed acres. And so you can do some math and figure out if there would be benefit for you. But for us, it's been a big win. So let's shift gears here over and go and talk about SymphonyVision. And so this is mainly local growers. As they know we're running the system, I'm getting kind of a couple of questions. The first one is, does it work? Everybody's pretty skeptical. And I would say, overall, it works, and it works well. And we'll talk through kind of how we've used it, what we've seen. And then the second question is, how did you use it? Because if you think about your current chemical program today, it probably does not align well with a targeted spray system. If you think about the number of planned passes, how you're doing residuals versus contacts, it probably doesn't actually make sense. And so I want to give you 3 ways that we use the targeted spray system, or SymphonyVision, on our own farm. So the first would be, we'll talk through our Enlist soybeans. So one thing too, guys, I want to say, I'm going to throw up a bunch of chemical prices up here. I went ahead and pulled those prices off the Farmers Business Network. So if you would run a similar program, your costs would be the same as what you're seeing up here. So our planned program going into the year was, hey, we are going to use targeted spray on our Enlist soybeans. So our pre-pass, at time of planting or a couple days afterwards, we went in and burned the farm down and sprayed Authority Supreme as our residual. Then coming back 6 to 8 weeks later, once the water hemp started to come up, our plan was to make 2 post passes using only contact killers. And so our first post was a Liberty Enlist. We threw some volunteer in to take care of the volunteer corn, and then we had our adjuvants. And so that program was about $25.50. And we were hitting it essentially max label on both the Liberty and Enlist. We wanted to make sure we got any weeds that were up. For our second post, we decided we would pull the Enlist and the volunteer. So it's essentially a Liberty only at max label rate, and we're at about $11 to $12 for that second post. So you're talking about $37 total for our post program, no residuals. And so this is what we saw. So this is an example of a field first post pass. So just to level set here a little bit, the map on your left is what we call a weed severity map. So this is generated from the SymphonyVision system, and it basically classifies weeds. So a single large weed would show up as a high weed severity because it's a big weed, it's a severe situation. Or lots of little weeds where they're very dense would also show up as high weed severity. So where you see yellow dots, these are areas where you have small scattered weeds. And so if you look at this field in particular, it's mainly yellow dots, so low weed severity kind of around the outside edges and along the edges of the terraces. The areas that we actually map high weed severity are actually waterways or terraces that the camera went out and over. It's not actually areas we're going to spray. So what we can see is most of this field is clean, where it's green, but there are areas of kind of low weed pressure. Then over on the right, this is our as-applied map. So this is what the sprayer actually did. So where the map is red, the sprayer is off. Where it's green or yellow, the sprayer is on. So you can see that we sprayed basically around the edges of the field and then kind of scattered areas in between those terraces and waterways. This is what it actually looked like day of spraying. So this is taken from the cab while we were spraying this field. So what you can see is there are groups of nozzles that will turn on for a few seconds, they spray, and then they turn off. And so that's whenever we are going over the top of a weed. So how we had the sprayer set was what I would say is fairly conservative. So wherever a weed was located, we sprayed with the nozzle directly over the weed, and then we had it set to spray with the nozzle on each side. I also had it set to spray roughly 3 feet before and 3 feet after the weed. So one way to think of it is I'm spraying like a 5 to 6 foot diameter circle around each weed in the field. The reason I did that is, one, I wanted to make sure I hit the weed. Just from an accuracy standpoint, this ensures that I get it. The other thing is, in my mind, is wherever I have larger weeds, odds are there's some tiny ones down in the residue around the bigger weed. And so this way, even if the cameras couldn't see them, it upped my chances of getting them killed. So even with those conservative settings, this is a 63-acre field. The sprayer was off for 35 of those acres. So I actually sprayed 28. So that's a 55% reduction in chemical used on this field. And so remember, I would say those are conservative settings. You could get more aggressive, spray a smaller area around each weed, and you could increase your savings, if you're more of a risk taker than I am. And so from a dollar standpoint, what does this look like? I had budgeted $25 per acre. So that should have been about $1,600 to cover that field. The reality was I ended up spending, about $700, so I saved $900, or $14 per acre. And that was a first post pass. The other thing is I would say is if we look at all the farms we sprayed, this would be a pretty good average. Somewhere between about 50 and 60% chemical reduction on that first post pass is what we experienced. Some fields were more, some fields less, but on average we were right in that 50 to 60% range. And I think too, as me personally gain more confidence, as you as an operator could gain more confidence, that number can go up as you kind of get more aggressive with the sprayer. So what did our second post look like? So this is an 80-acre field. What we did in this farm is we actually blanket sprayed 40 acres of it, and then we spot sprayed 40. This was a check for us. Do we get as good a control doing 2 passes of spot spray versus blanket spray? If I look at the area that we spot sprayed, so once again, that's the map on your right. So the sprayer is off, it's red. Where it's on, it's kind of that yellowish green color. You can see it was off most of the time. In this particular field, we were off 90% of the time. So on my second post, I only sprayed 10% of the farm. On average, on our second post pass, we were in that 10 to 20% sort of spraying. So 80 to 90% chemical reduction for a second post. Essentially, we were going in and cleaning up those last few, primarily water hemp for us, that we'd either missed on the first post or had emerged after that first post. And so if we look at it holistically, I was planning on about $36.50. The reality was I spent about 13 bucks. So I saved somewhere between $20 and $23 using the spot spray system. As I've talked through this with guys, I'm getting some pushback on, hey, I don't really want to make the second post. I would challenge that in a couple ways. One, we didn't put any residuals on that first post. So I saved that money. So I can even pull that money over. That more than pays for the second post. The other thing is that second post was extremely efficient. I mean, think about how much you can get sprayed if you're only spraying 10 to 20% of your acres. We were only filling about every 300 acres. And so I didn't even have to have a tender guy in the field all the time with me. And so it reduced my total man hours. My machine hours were efficient because I was able to just go from field to field and cover them. And so this was a pretty big win for us. And I think there's some real opportunity here. And think about your own program. Could this work for you, something like this? So that's beans. What about corn? I would say for corn, going into 2024, we had planned on not using the SymphonyVision system for corn. And the primary reason for that is I didn't think I had time to make a second post if I needed it. And so we made the decision, hey, we're going to do our normal program. We're going to use a burn down with residuals up front. We're going to do a single post, somewhere around V4, V5. That'll carry us over to canopy, and we'll be good. But we got thrown a little bit of a curveball last year. So we had gone in middle of April, not all of our acres, but more than I'd like to admit, and we sprayed our pre-plant. The problem was that it started to rain. And we had about 6 inches of rain before we got into plant. And so we were out of the fields almost 5 weeks at one point. By the time we were planting, the water hemp was already coming through. Our residuals pretty much just completely failed due to the weather and the water situation. And so now it's like, what do we do? I'm planting corn. I've got water hemp coming up. I've already wasted my pre-pass. And so we went in and sprayed our post, our normal post, kind of when that corn was V1, V2 type stage. The problem was at this point, some of the water hemp had gotten out of control. We'd waited a little bit too long. We probably got a 95+% kill on it. But now I've got fields that have just random scattered water hemp all over them. Not enough to affect my yield, but yet enough that it's going to be a mess the following year. And so we were talking through, what do we do? We weren't sure we really wanted to spend a bunch of money. Is it really that bad? And then we got to thinking, what if we went in and used the SymphonyVision system? We hadn't sprayed any Liberty on the corn. We normally don't do that. But what if we went in and sprayed a full rate of Liberty, set our vision system very conservatively? I was worried about crop damage at this point. We were pushing that V6 stage, when we're in trying to make this decision. I've seen Liberty flash burn some leaves off before. What if we dial that in, make it very conservative, we remove the crop risk, we lower our total costs, and we said, hey, let's try it. Because honestly, as we were talking through it, I think if we would not have had the SymphonyVision system, we wouldn't have done this. I didn't want to spend the 11 bucks an acre. At this point, you all remember last year, commodity prices are plunging. It's like, how much money do you throw at this? But since we had the system, it's like, let's try it. And so that's what we did. So this is this is an example field. So once again, the map on your left, that's your weed severity map. What you can see is most of that field is green, which means there wasn't weeds in it. You see there's some scattered yellow dots down in that southwest corner. You look over on the right, that's our as-applied map. So once again, you can see it's red most of the farm, but we did spray in that southwest corner quite a bit. And so what did the numbers work out to? That sprayer was off 80% of the time. So that means we sprayed 20%. So from a dollar standpoint, it cost me $2.20 an acre to go in and spray that corn again. As I've thought about this, it's like the question is SymphonyVision, is this a tool to save money, or is this a tool to get better weed control? I've always looked at it as a tool to save money. But the reality was, in this case, I actually spent more money than I had planned on. I had budgeted for a pre and one post. and then I sprayed again. So I spent more money, but I got better weed control. So I think SymphonyVision can be both. I think it can be a tool to save some money at times. I think it can also be a tool to get better weed control. Because one thing with SymphonyVision, it's an owned system. You own it. There is no per acre charge. And so if you want to make another post pass, the only cost you have in it is your machine time and whatever chemical you spray. So in this case, if I add my machine time to it, I'm still under $4 an acre that it cost me. And because I was able to spend that money, I was able to have a clean field moving forward. And so I think it was a great tool for us. And we ended up spraying quite a few acres this way in our corn. And overall, this is about what we averaged. We sprayed about 20%. And so for $2, I was able to clean up my fields, which was a big deal. The third way we've used it is in our fall burn down. So this is just this past November. Historically, we haven't sprayed a ton of fall burn down. We've kind of selectively gone in and sprayed fields that have been bad. We've had a couple of pretty warm winters in a row. We've had a bunch of fields that look like this the last couple springs. And so it's like, we've got time, we've got the SymphonyVision system, let's go in and try to take care of this fall. And so here's an example of one field. So this is a farm, it's 170 acres. It's about 10 miles east of Tremont where we're standing here. This is a farm that I would have said is bad. This is one that we have battled winter annuals in the last couple of years. And so even in this farm that I would say is bad, what you can see from the weed severity map is there's kind of a big circular area in that field that has high weed severity, but you still have a lot of areas on the east, west, and the south end that are pretty clean. And so after we'd sprayed it, it worked out that we sprayed 97 out of those 170 acres. So even in a field that is, quote, bad, we still reduced our total chemical use in this field by 43%. So one beauty with fall burn down is you're only spraying contact killers. And so it sets up really well for a vision system on a sprayer. In this particular case, we are spraying Roundup and 2,4-D. A lot of times we'll spray 2,4-D and dicamba. It just kind of depends on the field and the situation. So it's a relatively cheap program, but even so, we were still able to save about $3 an acre. So once again, this is a tool that gives us the ability to go into farms I would said are not bad, spray them, just spray a few, 10, 20, 30% of that field and get it cleaned up for a very minimal cost. And so it's allowed us to start being more aggressive with some of our spraying just because we know that the cost is so minimal. So it's really kind of changed how we have sprayed. And I think it will more as we get more and more comfortable with the system and more confident. It's going to change how we do things moving forward. So that's how we've used it. What you might actually care about is what's it look like in the field. And so there's myself, my cousin, groups from Precision Planting. We spent a lot of time out in the field, after we spot sprayed them, using maps, scouting, trying to figure out, did we miss any weeds? And I would say overall, the accuracy was very good. It was actually better than I expected. Was it perfect? No. But that's also why you're budgeting that second post to go in and clean up any misses. But overall, the accuracy was very, very good. One area that we quickly learned about that we missed was at a certain growth stage, velvet leaf looks very much like a soybean. It's something I'd never really thought about before. The color is slightly different, but the shape of the leaf is almost identical. And so we missed a lot of velvet leaf on our first post pass. But the good thing with this is we learned on our farm, so we don't have to learn on yours. We're able to take these images, the software team can take them, they call it annotating. Essentially, you map out where each weed is in that picture, and you feed it back into the model, and you train the model. So now for next year, the model has been trained to recognize this growth stage of velvet leaf, and so we won't miss them moving forward. And so while the accuracy was really good this past year, the accuracy is going to keep getting better as we move to the future. And so that's why I am getting pretty excited about this tech. The other thing by missing a few weeds, there was a benefit for me personally as well. I grew up walking beans. It's only fair that my kids walk them too. And so I've got my 6-year-old and my 4-year-olds out in the field. And I happened to look back and I realized I couldn't see the 4-year-old at all. The 6-year-old, all I can see is his head, and he's got his hose sticking out of the field so I can find him. And so here they are a minute later. And so, Precision learned a lot this past year. My kids learned the value of hard work. And so overall, it was a great experience. And so what have I learned overall with SymphonyVision? My takeaways are the technology is real. Like, you really can drive through your standing crop, you can see weeds, and you can spray them. I would also say the opportunity is real. There is a place to save money using this sort of system. The other thing is there is a place to use it as a weed control tool. So it's twofold. The other thing is it's pretty obvious to me that your current chemical program probably is not set up ideal for a vision system. And so one area I would challenge you is think about your current chemical system. Is there a way you can change the number of passes, how you're stacking your residuals and your contacts? You know, can you change your program to make it fit better with something like SymphonyVision? There's opportunity here, but I think it's going to require us all to change a little bit. So let's shift gears here a little bit. Talk about data for a few minutes. You know, on our own farm, we've been running a yield monitor. It's over 20 years now. But if I think about, I would say the first 10 years that we ran it, we harvested the farm, we looked at the yield map, we said, wow, that's neat, we can see a lot of stuff, and we never looked at it again. I honestly couldn't even tell you where those maps are. But I would say it was 12 years ago now, we said, hey, let's start at least saving them, because maybe someday we'll figure out what to do with them. And so I've got 12 years worth of year-over-year yield data that we can look at. And you can start to learn some interesting things looking at these farms year after year. So this is an example. This is an 80-acre field that we've got north of Tremont. It's a pretty good farm. It's a Sable Ipava farm, but in 2015, we took it on the chin. You know, you can see pretty big areas that we lost 50, 60, 70-plus bushel. You can see there's an area in the middle at the north end that was really good. You compare that to 2023. You know, 2023 had some variation, but overall, you're talking 10, 15, maybe 20 bushel across the field. You don't see those defined yield zones. And so we started thinking about what was different. You know, tillage was relatively similar. Fertility was relatively the same. Our chemical program, you know, how we planted it, there wasn't a lot different. But what was different was in 2015, if we go back and look at the rainfall, we took an extra 6 inches of rain during the growing season. And most of that rain came in June. And so what we can pretty quickly learn is that, hey, on a wetter year, this farm can't handle the water like it did in 23. And so I was able to get the old tile map from the landlord. And so this would be on your right, kind of right of that dotted line is the field we're looking at. And so if I take some, I'm going to call it artistic liberties here, and I transpose that tile map onto that farm, what you can pretty quickly see is where that farm was drained, we made a lot more money. We're talking about 50 bushel the acre extra where the farm was drained. And I would say for us on our own farm, as we've started to look at our year-over-year data, the biggest thing that has jumped out at us is that we have drainage issues on a lot of fields. And the drainage issues are worse. I mean, you know where the wet areas of your field are, but when you look at those yield maps year after year, you start realizing how big they are and the magnitude of the loss. And so I realize every farm is different. For you, it might not be drainage. There's areas of the country that are listening in today that it's the last of your concerns. You know, maybe it's fertility, but for us, it was drainage. And so it was 6 years ago now, we made the decision, hey, we know where these yield zones are, that we're taking the hit on these wet years. Let's do something about it. And so my brother, cousin, and I went and bought a tile plow, a stringer, a mini hoe, and we upgraded a software program on our PTX monitor, added a water management system to it, and we started tiling. And so I'd say when we first got started, this was a little intimidating. You know, you can put a lot of tile in the ground fast. You can cost yourself a lot of money. You can really screw up a farm. But I would say the advent of GPS and a good water management software program has really made this easier. You know, now using our system, we can basically drive the line we want to put a tile in. We've got a GPS receiver on the tile plow itself. We call it surveying. So you drive it, it gets your elevation. You can drop that plow in the hole, measure your outlet depth. You can set your min depth, your max depth, your kind of optimal depth, your minimum slope. You can essentially set your parameters, and that water management software will then tell you, hey, can I install this pipe or not? Yes or no. If it says yes, then you're ready to go. You can basically put the plow on the ground, you put it in auto mode, and you take off. Because that monitor interacts with your tractor hydraulics. It uses the tractor hydraulics to adjust the height of the plow based off the GPS. And so for us, this has been a big win. You know, I'd love to tell you we've got all of our farms tiled. We don't. I don't have time. There's some money issues involved with that. But we are drastically better from a drainage situation than we were 6 years ago. We're basically trying to pick 1, 2, or 3 farms a year and go in and fix the worst areas. And so over time, we have been able to start to dial in and change some of these low-yielding areas on our own farm. And so my challenge for you guys is you have the data. You've got yield maps. You probably know where you're replanting on a regular basis. You know where your field pins are. You've got your soil types, fertility, you know, your scouting. You know where these zones are. Do something about it. Try to fix them. You know, for us, it was drainage. For you, it could be something totally different. But the opportunity is there.